Hello and welcome to a new video gambit. Today we'll be discussing Spider-Man Far From Home. Let's begin.
Everything changes.
Now, I want to preface my review by saying that it's really hard to compare the Spider-Man Homecoming series in the MCU to anything else. It's really apples and oranges. I will never compare Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse to any other Spider-Man film because it is just so completely different and able to do things that live-action films would never be able to do. Similarly, because Spider-Man Far From Home is part of an overarching narrative and a 22-film saga known as the MCU up to this point, I cannot compare it to what has come before. The masterful Raimi trilogy and even the horrible Andrew Garfield trilogy. There is just no comparison. That being said, I also would like to preface this video by saying that I think a lot of people are torn about the advantages and disadvantages of having Spider-Man in the MCU. Some people, what they like, others hate, and vice versa. I don't know how much people weigh the circumstances that a film is made under when they make their review, but it heavily influences me. And one of the things that really hurts the MCU films is the fact that they are in the MCU. You get a standard, formulaic storytelling structure that appeals to the greatest common denominator, and it often makes billions. Not only that, but the Spider-Man Homecoming films have also had to try and win back the goodwill of the people who were burned because of the Weber and Garfield films. They are trying to be something completely different. We know what happens when you try and make the Raimi films but better or worse. When you make them better, you get Into the Spider-Verse. When you make them worse, you get The Amazing Spider-Man. There is just no way to do this again. So therefore, Jon Watts, Tom Holland, and the people at Sony and Marvel have decided to try and do everything that we have not seen done before. Take Spider-Man to Europe. Let him swing around Queens. We did not even get to see him swing around Manhattan till the end of this film. They seem very content to keep him Spider-Boy for a little longer than maybe some of us fans would like to hope for, and eventually have him grow into, hopefully, one of the main staples of the MCU going forward. That his films will be one of the heavy hitters like a Captain America or an Iron Man, now that we have lost both of them. All of these things combined seem to lead Spider-Man into an Ant-Man and the Wasp kind of fun, lighthearted, summer popcorn flick that a lot of the hardcore Spider-Man films may enjoy or review positively, but still leaves them longing for more. Whereas for others, this is perfectly suitable, given the tragedy of the Andrew Garfield films. And we will gladly take Tom Holland for another 30 years. Also, these tactics and this strategy in particular seems to be increasingly all the more necessary in light of two recent events. One, we have discovered that Marvel is not allowed to make a third Tom Holland Spider-Man Homecoming style film unless Far From Home reaches $1 billion. Luckily for us, it's already more than halfway there and should hopefully by the end of its second weekend meet this marker. The second bit of information we have discovered is that the deal between Sony and Marvel includes caveats that suspend any and all characters used in the films produced jointly by Sony and Marvel. This is why we don't have an Uncle Ben. This is why we have a young Aunt May. This is why we have a racially bent Mary Jane. Because any time that these characters are used, they cannot be used by Marvel or Sony individually. They can only be used when they work together. That's why Sony, in an attempt to maintain its rights to the redhead MJ, to an old Aunt May, to a non Spider-Boy reliant on Tony Stark version of Spider-Man, they can keep those for any and all future uses without letting their rights to them get tied up in this deal with Marvel. I would like to credit Midnight's Edge for their spectacular video that breaks this down in detail. Please go watch it. This puts the film in a very, very interesting place, where you'll have people that either hate it because of its incredible mediocrity, or those that appreciate its different take on the signature web slinger. I find myself somewhere in the middle. I don't know why. Maybe I just reached the 5th stage of grief faster than most and come to accept what we are given these days, because even though I don't really find them that entertaining, but I do find them very, very necessary.
Like your father, you lack the courage to do all that is necessary.
Not only that, but this film had to close out Phase 3 and try and set the pace going forward. It had to re-spark interest in anyone that was emotionally devastated and done with the MCU following Endgame. And I think for a lot of people, this film might have done that. Time will tell. Time will also tell if this strategy has hurt or helped Spider-Man films in the long run. Once again, I can excuse the lackluster, small-scale take of the web-slinger in these films, but I will not be accepting it going forward. I said that Homecoming, while it was an okay film, I thought was a good platform to launch a great sequel off of. I now will revise that statement. Homecoming was a good platform. Far From Home was a good countdown. But if the next film is not Liftoff, you might find me on the hateful side of the internet raging about how Sony and Marvel are wasting Tom Holland's Spider-Man films.
Like your father, you lack the courage to do all that is necessary.
Context aside, let's get into the specifics. There is very little in this film that I consider a negative. There are a few things that I consider downsides or things that I would have liked improving upon, but once again, because of the context that the film was made in, I can't necessarily fault it. So, what I didn't like. I think that Jake Gyllenhaal was a little bit on the weak side. I have never seen any of his other films, so it's not like I was looking forward to his performance particularly. And he did a great job, and I thoroughly enjoyed his performance. But the character of Mysterio was a little bit redundantly written, and I wish the conflict would have focused a little bit more in the second half of the film between Tom Holland and Mysterio, so that way we wouldn't have had Spider-Man succumbing to the terrible fate of just having a third act completely revolving around fighting a faceless CGI disposable army. I also feel that similarly to Ant-Man, where it was cool that they tried to make that film try and fit into the larger MCU, that of all people to sell the Yellow Jacket suit to, the bad guy had to sell it to Hydra. I felt that that was just a little too, come on, now you're trying to feel included into this universe. Similarly, that's how I felt with Mysterio and his a little too long exposition of how everything was working, who was on his team, how they were from previous Marvel films that Tony Stark had fired and they all felt wronged by. It all just led to a very redundant and long explanation that, given a few more script drafts, could have probably been tightened up into a nicer scene. Another thing I didn't like was when the kids were first discussing Mysterio and wondering who he was. The dialogue in that situation was also a little bit rough and could have used another draft or two. Lastly, I didn't like the fact that I was lied to in the advertising. If there's anything I can't stand, it's false advertising. They know we wanted that classic 67 theme to play in this movie. They know we enjoyed it in the beginning of Homecoming, and they know that we ate every second that it was played in all of the trailers and yet it was nowhere to be found in the film, not even in the credits. And for that, I dock 9 points from this film. I give it a 1 out of 10. I'll see you all next week. Okay, all joking aside, those are pretty much my critiques. Everything that I outlined in the preface and everything that I just considered here in negative. Once again, I think that they were ignorable, negligible, or mostly unimportant. They're just the minor nitpicks that I had with a mostly overall alright film. The things that I did like Zendaya's new portrayal of MJ Michelle Jones. It retconned and added another layer to her previously SJW type persona that made it look like it was a tougher outer shell of a just as awkward and shy and timid inner shell that was so well related to Peter's awkwardness and characteristics that added such nice levels of chemistry between Zendaya and Tom Holland. I really liked what they did with the character, and I'm actually excited to see what they do with her going forward. Another thing I liked were the visuals. This film was very well done. The special effects were magnificent. You never will be able to kill me with practical effects. I will take them whenever possible, but because we know how CGI goes and how overused it can be in the MCU, it did look nice, and especially the fights with Mysterio that were so trippy. I just wish they would have lasted a little longer, especially the one at the end. But the fight at the end was so amazing and epic that it actually reminded me of the Darth Vader hallway scene from Rogue One. Please, Marvel, continue to do things like this with Spider-Man and give us more of this. I also really liked the post-credit scenes in that the second one, even though I didn't like the fact that Nick Fury was a Skrull the whole time, it was great to see Ben Mendelsohn showing that the Skrulls will have a presence in the MCU going forward. But I'm not a fan of seeing Nick Fury disrespected in film twice in the same year. Obviously, for these reasons, the first post-credit scene was the much, much better one. And it was incredible to see J.K. Simmons make a return as J. Jonah Jameson. Literally, no one else can play this role, and I am so happy that we live in a day and age where fan service is a thing, where fan input is a thing, and where we now have usually pretty hard and fast cinema rules being broken down, where one character from another timeline, universe, film series can play the same character, and this is incredible. Hopefully this means that going forward, J.K. Simmons will play a larger role in the next film, and that we could possibly even have Tobey Maguire as the young Uncle Ben to Marissa Tomei's young Aunt May, and have him say the words, "With great power comes great responsibility," or something to that effect that isn't terrible, to Tom Holland. Tom Holland has been pushing for this, and he said that it's something he's willing to do, but in light of the fact that this phrase might get copyright suspended because of its use, and Sony probably wants to hang on to it, this is why it probably has not been said up until this point. Also, as I said before, Tom Holland could play Spider-Man for the next 30 years, and I hope he does. I'm really excited to see what they do with the character going forward. I know a lot of people really hammered this film for its pacing and somewhat slow or boring first half, but one of the things that I will give this film credit for finally, and this is my last point, is that it kind of felt like a comic book. Not in the sense that we got a comic book movie like Endgame and Infinity War with epic scale, multiple locations, and heroes just interacting with each other in ways we never would have thought possible. But I'm actually talking about the pacing of this film. Every 20 minutes of this film, I would actually break into one issue of a comic series, and the whole being a volume or the entire film. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. Once again, as I said, what a lot of people consider upsides are downsides for others, and vice versa. And because of this, recently my good friend Tim Rex, now Red Raptor Writes, asked me, do I think that Spider-Man being in the MCU has helped or hurt Spider-Man? I think it has helped Spider-Man in that it has kept him alive, because he was going to be pretty dead after The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and it will be very interesting to see what they do with him going forward, but it has hurt him for all of the reasons that I outlined previously, especially the fact that we are getting just decent popcorn summer flicks with no actual depth that has not reached any of the heights of any of the other films thus far. The only definitive answer will come in time. Well, that's what I think of Spider-Man Far From Home. I give Homecoming an 8 out of 10, and I give Far From Home an 8.5 out of 10. Now, if I was going to put this on a scale of like Amazing Spider-Man to Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man 2, it would kind of probably fall more along the lines of a 5, but you know, as I said, I cannot compare. They are too different. Well, that's my take on Spider-Man Far From Home. Please, if you enjoyed the content, leave a like, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you next week when I hopefully finally do my 3 things great about Iron Man 2. Have a great day.